Jacques de Molay was not a king. He did not command a kingdom. He did not sit on a throne. But as Grand Master of the Knights Templar, he stood at the top of one of the most powerful religious military organizations in Europe. And now that organization was collapsing around him. When the arrests began in France in 1307, de Molay was captured. He was imprisoned, he was interrogated, and he was eventually forced to confront accusations that could destroy everything the Templars had built. The charges were serious: heresy, blasphemy, secret rituals, denial of Christ, unholy ceremonies, sexual misconduct, and the mysterious Baphomet. But there was an important problem. The evidence was inconsistent. Different prisoners described different ceremonies. Some denied the accusations completely. Others confessed and later withdrew their confessions. Some claimed they had confessed only because of torture, and this created a major problem for the Church. Could the Templars actually be convicted? Or were the accusations being manufactured for political reasons? The Pope attempted to establish a broader investigation. Templars in different countries were questioned. The results varied considerably. In some places, the evidence against the order was weak. In others, confessions appeared. But the situation in France remained particularly severe. Philip IV wanted the Templars destroyed, and he wanted control of their property. This is where the financial question becomes important. The popular version of the story often says that Philip was simply bankrupt and wanted the Templar treasure. The reality is more complicated. Philip had serious financial problems, but the Templars' wealth was not necessarily sitting in one giant vault filled with gold. Their wealth consisted largely of land, estates, buildings, livestock, rights, and financial assets spread across Europe. Still, destroying the order would weaken a major independent institution and could transfer control over its possessions. That was valuable. The Church eventually reached a compromise. The Templars would not simply continue operating as before. In 1312, Pope Clement V formally suppressed the order. The decision effectively ended the Knights Templar as an independent institution. But what happened to their property? In principle, much of it was supposed to pass to another military order. The Knights Hospitaller became the main beneficiary in many areas. But the transfer was not simple. Different rulers controlled different territories. Some seized Templar possessions, some transferred them, some retained them. The process took years. The organization was disappearing. But the men themselves were still being judged. And this is where Jacques de Molay's final chapter begins. In 1314, years after the original arrests, de Molay was brought before a panel in Paris. The case against him had been built around his earlier confession. But de Molay now rejected the accusations. He insisted that the Templars were not guilty of the crimes attributed to them. Another senior Templar, Geoffroy de Charnay, also defended the order. The situation suddenly changed. If the Grand Master publicly rejected his confession, the case became more complicated. The authorities could not simply allow him to contradict the official narrative. The result was devastating. Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay were condemned as relapsed heretics. On March 18, 1314, they were executed. According to contemporary accounts, they were burned at the stake on an island in the Seine in Paris. The Knights Templar were finished, at least officially. The organization that had once stretched across Europe was gone. But the story did not end with the executions. In fact, this is where the legends began. Over the centuries, people started asking questions. What happened to the Templar treasure? Did some knights escape? Did they carry secret documents with them? Did they survive underground? Did they flee to Scotland? Did they establish secret organizations? And most famously, did the Templars discover something in the Holy Land that the Church did not want anyone to know? These questions have generated enormous mythology, but history requires separating what we know from what we imagine. Let's begin with the treasure. The Templars certainly possessed wealth, but there is no convincing evidence that they had one enormous hidden treasure capable of explaining every later legend. When Philip's forces arrested the Templars, they seized property, but they did not discover a gigantic secret vault containing mountains of gold. And this is significant. If the king's primary goal had been to seize a massive treasure, the results were disappointing. Much of the Templar wealth was tied to land and property. It could not simply be carried away. There were also questions about how much money the organization actually controlled at any given time. The Templars were financially sophisticated, but that does not mean they possessed unlimited wealth. Then there is the story of the escaped fleet. Some legends claim that Templar ships left France before the arrests. According to later stories, these ships supposedly carried treasure and escaped to places such as Scotland or Portugal. There is evidence that Templar members survived the suppression. Some entered other military orders. Some disappeared into other parts of society. Portugal is particularly interesting because the Templars there were transformed into a new organization, the Order of Christ. The Portuguese crown eventually used this order for exploration, and centuries later, ships connected to the Portuguese voyages would sail into the Atlantic. This has encouraged theories connecting the Templars to the discovery of the Americas. But the evidence does not establish that the Templars themselves secretly discovered America. That idea belongs largely to later speculation. The Scottish connection is also fascinating. The Templars were supposedly involved in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. According to some legends, they arrived to help Robert the Bruce defeat the English. But there is no strong contemporary evidence establishing a large Templar force participating in that battle. The story became popular much later. This is a recurring pattern in Templar history. A small historical detail becomes attached to a much larger story. Then the story grows. Then the legend becomes more famous than the evidence. The same thing happened with Baphomet. Today, the name Baphomet is associated with occult imagery. But the historical Templar accusations did not describe one consistent image. Different prisoners gave different accounts. Later writers combined these accusations with other traditions. Over time, Baphomet became a symbol of secret knowledge and hidden religious traditions. but there is no reliable evidence that the Templars possessed the modern occult symbol commonly associated with the name. The same problem appears with the Holy Grail. Modern stories often connect the Templars to the Grail, but there is no solid historical evidence that the Templars possessed the legendary cup. The idea grew from medieval romances, later literature, and modern popular culture. The Templars became the perfect subject for these stories because their real history already contained everything needed for mystery. They were wealthy, they were secretive, they had religious rituals. They operated across borders, they fought in the Holy Land. They disappeared suddenly, and their archives were scattered. That combination created an enormous space for speculation. But there is another question that matters even more. Why did the Templars become so powerful in the first place? The answer tells us something about medieval Europe. The Templars were not powerful because they possessed some supernatural secret. They were powerful because they solved practical problems. They provided security, they managed land, they protected assets, they moved money, they maintained military forces. They operated within a system where religion, politics, warfare, and economics were deeply connected. Their success was the result of organization, and their downfall was partly the result of that same organization. Because once the Crusader states collapsed, the Templars had to justify their continued existence. Their original mission had become increasingly difficult. There was no longer a Christian Jerusalem to defend. Their wealth remained, their privileges remained, their international network remained. But the political environment had changed, and powerful kings were increasingly interested in centralized authority. The Templars represented something from an older world, a transnational military order, a religious organization with property in multiple kingdoms, a body protected by the Pope, an institution that could operate independently of local rulers. That kind of organization was increasingly difficult to tolerate, especially for a king like Philip IV. And so the Templars became vulnerable. But there is one final question. Were they actually innocent? The answer is not as simple as saying every accusation was invented. Medieval religious organizations were not perfect. Templars were human beings. There may have been individual misconduct. There may have been abuses. There may have been internal disputes. But that is very different from proving that the entire order was secretly practicing heresy. The evidence for a widespread secret cult is extremely weak. The strongest historical interpretation is that the accusations were heavily shaped by political circumstances and coercive interrogation. The Templars were a powerful institution caught at the wrong moment in European history. Their protection from the Pope made them difficult for kings to control. Their wealth made them attractive targets. Their military mission had weakened, and their enemies had the political power to destroy them. Once the process began, survival became almost impossible. Yet even after the order was officially suppressed, its memory continued growing. The more mysterious the disappearance became, the more stories appeared. And eventually, the Templars became something far larger than they had ever been in life. They became a symbol of hidden knowledge, hidden treasure, secret societies, lost archives, ancient bloodlines, and conspiracies stretching across centuries. But the real story may actually be more interesting, because the Templars do not need fictional secrets to be fascinating. Their real history shows how an organization created for one purpose can evolve into something completely different. They began as a small group protecting pilgrims. They became an international military institution. They accumulated wealth and political influence. Then the world around them changed. The Crusader states collapsed. Their military purpose weakened. European monarchies became stronger. And a king decided that the Templars had become too powerful to tolerate. The organization that had survived battlefields could not survive politics. But there was still one final mystery. If the Templars disappeared in 1312, what happened to everything they had built? Who inherited their land? Where did their members go? And did any part of their organization survive under another name?